And good morning, everyone. Some technical issues. It's been a while since we've done a Zoom. So we're refreshing ourselves, but it's a great subject matter for a Friday and sunshine is out. We're going to talk about finances and the BC budget. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Rogers. I'm the CEO for the Kelowna Chamber of Commerce. Spent a fair bit last night going through various summaries of the BC budget. We have some special guests that have joined us, some on a limited time. So we really appreciate MLA Renee Merrifield from Kelowna Mission, who has joined us this morning. As many know, she was first elected for MLA Kelowna Mission in 2020. She currently serves as the Shadow Minister for Environment, Climate Change, Technology, and Innovation. And I will come back to innovation when we bring Renee on here momentarily. She has a restricted time, Alex, so we're going to get some of Renee's feedback on the budget, one of our local MLAs. Momentarily. Also joining us, and pleased that you could join us this morning, Alex McMillan. He serves as the Interim Director of Policy for the BC Chamber of Commerce and is the principal of his own communications consultancy, McMillan Solutions. Alex draws insights from over 20 years of diverse experience in government, politics, and the private sector in BC. Spent some time in the mining area? That's correct. That's good, because we're going to talk a little bit about mining this morning in the time that we have. I'm going to go through this pretty quick because I want to bring you on, Renee, and get your comments overall. The expenditures are going up. Capital spending of $43.3 billion. This is big time money. And in the course of our half hour, we're going to talk about billions. Now we're going to talk about small projects. So we'll have the big range here. We started to look at the capital projects, and Alex, I don't know if you got any deeper to see if anything in the Okanagan, the interior. There was a comment on our briefing yesterday. Any money for Lytton to help in the recovery? So it's a good point that was made. A community that got wiped off the face of the map, and still, I think they have one building permit. I think we heard on the call yesterday, Alex. This is an interesting one, the taxpayer-supported GDP ratio, and whether it will impact the credit rating. The credit rating in BC has always had a fairly good credit rating, and that's the cost of borrowing, so it does impact taxpayers. The reference, and Renee, you even heard it on this morning on your interview, I think on a local radio station. Yeah, but we're not as bad as Ontario or Quebec. But when you look at the numbers, we are starting to go that. I'm going to come back to this one. I'm going to stop sharing. These are some of the highlights that we noted. Alex, we'll get into these, but let me first go over to Renee. And Renee, maybe if you can provide your thoughts and assessment as our local MLA in the context of anything you see there that might be seen positively from the business community in the central Okanagan interior area.
Well, I would love to, but it's going to be hard, and that's the reality. I was hoping for much, much more for our business communities, because obviously that's what we need to stimulate our economy. And we know that small and medium-sized businesses are the backbone to any economy, and especially economies in recovery or needing resilience, which we certainly did coming out of the pandemic. The one sliver which the NDP will really hang their hat on is the EHT, and the EHT threshold being moved from 500,000 to 1 million. But, and I say but, I'm going to really challenge that number, because they're also predicting that they're going to collect $265 million more from businesses in EHT over this next year. And the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade had a third-party assessment done on how much the taxation was actually costing businesses under the NDP government, and it was $6.1 billion. So the NDP claim that it's going to give back $100 million to small and medium-sized enterprises. That $100 million is not going to offset the $365 million more, which then nets them out 265 gain in the EHT, which simply means that they are pulling more from businesses overall. And the real proviso is, since 2019, when the EHT came into being, we've seen wages and salaries exponentially grow. I mean, the labor market and the shortage and the competition out there for great people has really accelerated wages to a threshold now that I would say most businesses are going to be over that $1 million threshold. So it's a drop in the bucket. In fact, I had one constituent this morning bright and early say to me, you know what, Renee, I'm a farmer. I farm and my payroll is over 3 million and I pay EHT on all of my workers, which means because after that 1 million, the notch rate went from 2.5 to 5, which doubled. So they're now going to be paying double the rate. And for farmers, as you guys know, they also pay for MSP for their workers. So it's a double dipping that government does on all of our farming communities. So is it good news? Maybe for some really small businesses, but for the vast majority, I don't think it's going to make an impact.
I just want to clarify that, and Alex, you're in the lockup as well. But Renee, from what you say, and just to expand on that, so they increased the threshold. Certainly the BC Chamber in our position was to increase it to 1.5 million. But what you're saying, did they shift the expected revenue and then just move the notch level up so that it's now being borne by the others that are still over that cap and the threshold?
That's correct. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if the question went to Alex or to me, but that's correct. The notch rate has gone up and doubled. So that notch rate on the second level is where you're going to be hit the hardest. And for businesses, as we know, that are struggling, that EHT gets paid before you have any profits. It's not it's not out of any surplus that you might have. That comes out right off your bottom line. So that is a significant amount that this NDP government is going to be taking from businesses.
A lot of the focus, and we'll get into the details a little bit as we go along on the budget, is around housing and BC Build. There's money there. The federal government's even come to the table. Do you have any sense of how that may be dispersed? And can we have some sense that there will be some equity in distribution of those fundings that have been kind of set aside?
No.
Yeah.
It's going to be completely discretionary. NDP are going to spend it where they think they have the best chances of winning, and that's election, I guess. But they're also going to be spending it where they already own land. That was one of the underlying criteria for that money. So when I look around, I don't see a lot of surplus government land that's sitting in Kelowna or sitting in the Okanagan just waiting for buildings. And so that is a proviso for it. When Evie was talking about and really selling the BC builds, I was thinking to myself, a rental building or a rental project here in Kelowna, and really in most of the Okanagan would take the amount of time that he's talking about it taking. So it's not really an acceleration of sorts. And I just want to laud the private sector. I know EB came down really hard on the private sector, saying we can't rely on them to build. Well, the private sector actually built, and this is the NDP's numbers, but built 25,000 purpose-built rentals over the course of the last year. In the 10-year plan, the 7 years that the NDP have had to build affordable housing, they've only created 16,000. So I just want to, big shout out to the private sector, and that is being fueled by federal programs. So the federal CMHC MLI Select program, as well as the GST abatement, those two alone is what is driving rental projects right now. And the one thing I will say and give credit to the NDP for stealing the BC United's homework is on that PST abatement for purpose-built rental. That will have an impact positively for rentals coming online. Now, the BC United would have taken PST off of all new housing. And the reason is that when you have a discount on any new development, what ends up happening is that goes directly to the consumer. And in turn, you stop that acceleration of equity gain from all resales. So you have an effect on the whole of the market just by impacting the cost of new development.
I just want to go back to this slide again and then kind of talk to it a little bit with respect to the deficit. I think the finance minister was asked near the end of the day yesterday, is balancing the budget a goal? And I kind of reflected in the 1980s when Canada went first to the men to the World Cup in Mexico, and they said, well, if we score a goal, the trouble is there was no plan to develop and get there. So I kept thinking that based on this and where we're going on the fiscal side and the increasing deficit and debt, is there anything here that you see that will work towards at least a path towards a balanced budget, or is
No.
that a thing of the past now?
The path towards a balanced budget is twofold. Either you have to increase your revenues, and by that you're stimulating your economy, or you have to decrease your costs. And this government has no intention of doing either. In fact, if I was to title this budget, it would be more in all caps, so much more, but the same. They're like a shotgun approach and spending, trinkets all over the map. Everyone gets something, but it's small in nature and it doesn't do anything to actually, deal with the underlying, issues for people, which is the cost of living, or to deal with how to stimulate business and the business economy, and to really create an environment where investment is coming back to BC. We do not see that. We do not see that in this budget. And over the next 3 budgets, it is horrific, the amount that they are planning on adding to the overall BC debt. A baby born today is 15,000 in debt. A baby born in 2026 is now 22,000 in debt. And I know we use the GDP ratio. Stephen Pollatz in his address to the CFA, I guess it was a year ago now, he said that's a dangerous metric to use. Number one, you don't want to race to the bottom. That's, that's not a badge of honor to say like, oh, we are now the official worst in Canada. So we're the worst in Canada on cancer wait times. We're the worst in Canada on surgical wait times. We're the worst in Canada on housing affordability. We're the worst in Canada on the gas prices. We're the worst in Canada. I don't know if we want really another badge of like, we're the worst in Canada in terms of what our debt actually is. So I wouldn't call that a badge of honor. But the other thing is that we don't have any plans to actually stimulate our economy. And that is one thing that Quebec and Ontario have done a far better job in actually looking at what they need to do. And I mean, Ontario is going to focus on manufacturing. That has been their MO. That's what they do best. They're positioned well to do that. We are positioned well for the natural resource sector, and we are literally cutting off our nose to spite our face by making it so difficult for permitting, whether it's in the mining industry, whether it's in the natural, resource sector and LNG, or whether it's in forestry. We're seeing those revenues go down, save only LNG, and that's only because the natural gas price is going up, not because we're actually getting more projects on stream.
So on the slide, we note obviously the increasing deficit and the accumulated deficit. If you start to add some big numbers together there, one of the things that strikes me is the contingencies, and it jumped significantly from the fiscal plan that we saw last year, almost doubled in the contingency. And Alex, I don't know, in the lockup, did you get a sense of at least the 3.9 billion that's in contingencies in the upcoming fiscal plan, whether some of that, I heard some reference, some of it set aside in case FIFA costs go high, but any expectation of where that contingency, and I'll come back to you, Renee, on that too, if you have some thoughts or if you've heard anything.
Yeah, the general contingencies this year also, last year they had broken them out a little bit more, so they've pulled them together. But yeah, the 3.9 billion is quite large, and there is a reference in the budget document around the need to finalize agreements with FIFA for the upcoming World Cup, and so they've, I guess, and it's not clear how much they've allocated inside contingencies to address that in the coming year, but no indication how big it is. It was just interesting that says it's for FIFA.
Yeah, and it's interesting in the reflection when I started to look at last year, there was $1 billion set aside in contingencies broken out with respect to pandemic response and recovery. But in the updated forecast for 23-24, I didn't see it. So did that just get blended in? Was that spent? Renee, do you know?
It would have been spent. So it would have been contingencies that would have been used within the budget.
And that would have been as the expenditure in the updated forecast of that 83 billion. Okay.
Yeah, and can we just talk
Yeah.
about the debt right now? Just one more thing that I think gives some context to what's happening with our debt. It took 150 years to accumulate the first 50 billion. So, I mean, even if you were to do net present value of that dollar and, and amortize it and put the inflationary, basis in it, et cetera, it's still like, even if we say it took 75 years instead of 150 years, it took 150 years to do that first 50 billion. But under the NDP, the BC's debt has already doubled. So in 7 years, it's doubled to 103 billion, which is the 23-24, but it's going to hit 165 billion in 26-27. That is a tripling of our debt in 10 years. That is astronomical. And just to, understand what that's going to cost British Columbia on a yearly basis, next year they are predicting 4.1 billion in interest costs. And by 2026, that number is like 5.7 billion. That is it would be the fourth largest ministry if it had a ministerial association with it. And that's ridiculous. It's half of all we spend on education costs.
The numbers are up on the screen there. They are climbing, both the taxpayer-supported debt and then debt to revenue as a percentage. So I do want to talk a bit about that, because you had a question this morning what I thought was rather interesting on the local radio station when you said, well, there are only two options. The option is cut services or increase taxes. And I thought to myself, we've gone through a pandemic. We've seen nonprofits, we've seen businesses look at new ways of doing business, using innovation, technology, looking at opportunities for collaboration, looking at supply lines, looking at every opportunity, contracted services versus own services. Is innovative approaches gone from government, or maybe the expectation that they may follow the lead of the private sector that went through extreme challenges through a pandemic and looked at doing business differently?
No, there's no innovation in this budget. There is no, there's very little. I don't think, technology was mentioned in biomedical sciences, and, there's very, very little in this budget that stimulates the private sector, that stimulates the economy. And that's scary, because when you're not dealing with the underlying issues as to why you're having to run such absolutely horrific debt and deficits, you're not anywhere closer to doing to getting back to where we need to be, which is the path towards a more balanced approach.
I want to just return briefly to the contingencies, and there was a note in some of the documents, and Alex, with respect to priority spending initiatives and caseload pressures. Either of you can explain what caseload pressures is? That future labor agreements potentially, or Alex, do you have a sense?
I wasn't able to get clarity when I was in the budget lockup around caseload pressure, but that's where my mind went, is that, as the government grows and they hire, more people, they need to identify how they're going to pay for those people. So, putting those in the contingencies is common to what governments do. They don't want to reveal their cards too far in advance. So I would imagine that may be part of how those contingencies may be allocated in future years. But that it's just my guess. It's not anything that's been confirmed by any inside government.
Yeah. I want to come back to elements that are in here, and certainly there was reference from some of the business circles with respect to at least some funding for a critical minerals strategy. There is some tax credits that consumers, as well as commercial and industrial, on the electricity side. So I wonder if, Alex, can you provide a little bit of details? And I wouldn't mind, Renee, I know your time is tight, a little bit of comments. So first, Alex, if you could just talk about the credits that are in there that might impact the sector like mining, the critical minerals strategy, and a little bit of funding there, and then some credit relief on the electrical side that will be forthcoming.
Why don't I go in reverse order? Maybe I'll just talk about the BC, what they've called the BC Electricity Affordability Credit, which is going to be applied to residential, commercial, and industrial users. It's I want to highlight, it's a one-time credit for 1 year. And it will be about 4.6% on your hydro bill. And so residents, I think they've calculated about $100. Obviously, big industrial users, that's going to be for those who use a lot of electricity. It could be quite a big number, but it's only 1 year, and I don't think businesses make decisions on 1 year. On the critical minerals strategy, they announced the critical mineral strategy early in January. They have put some dollars behind that in order to facilitate getting permits and being able to get some of those critical minerals out of the ground. I think government hasn't had a lot of success with getting permits through. Premier Eby has said that many times that they need to improve there. I think, one of the things that the BC Chamber has been saying is that we can't do the same thing and keep on expecting different results. We need to innovate. And so that's an area where we would have liked to see a little bit more innovation, is being able to do things differently to get those critical minerals to market, because the world needs them. And if they're not going to get them from BC, they're going to get them from somewhere. They don't have to buy them from us. And if we can't get those minerals out of the ground, they're going to be somebody else's economic opportunity.
On the mining side, I was reminded probably 20 years ago when we talked about mining, and you have to look at the state of mining, and mining doesn't happen overnight. And if there isn't investment or exploration, you're a 10-year horizon until you actually start to actually see some development. So Renee, on that critical minerals strategy and funding there, and then the one-time tax refund.
Yeah, critical minerals, we literally have the longest permitting times in Canada, longest permitting times in North America, and some would argue the longest permitting times in the world. So that's not a badge that we'd like to wear. I agree with 100% with Alex. What they should have done is really try and turn it on its head and say, we're going to do things differently. We're going to run concurrent processes. We're going to have one permitting office. We're going to do instead, they said, no, we're going to hire more bureaucrats, and we're going to hopefully, help the process. Doubling down on a strategy that's not working is not a solution. And I think that we're going to see more of the same, and a frustrated mining sector, indeed. The BC, electricity one-time rebate, like Alex said, is one time, $100. Most people will be very negligible. It's not being well received, not by any of the usual suspects that you would expect to be hailing this as as something dramatic or radical. But I think that's because the hydro rates have been going up steadily, and the $36 billion that they promised towards the electrical upgrades that are required for electrification they're so far behind the eight ball that it's throwing all of these major projects into question. We're seeing ourselves in surge rates, actually having to import electricity from our coal burning and natural gas burning neighbors, and so we're definitely not seeing the progress that I think everyone has been promised by this government, and that everyone wants to do, just to be good citizens and good stewards of our environment. So this was much ado about nothing, and a lot of that electrical upgrade, they're not focused on getting that to major projects. They're focused on the highway system and transportation network, which on the one hand is great, because they've got these EV restrictions that are coming in, where everyone has to buy an EV by 2030. But having said that, even at 100% EV on light duty vehicles, we're only going to lower our emissions by 0.5 of a megaton, which is a drop in the bucket for our 70 megatons a year. So that to me is, why are we spending $60 billion, $36 billion over the next 3 years for that infrastructure, when that's really not going to be what's going to dramatically lower our emissions? Again, this government believes in spending, spend, but not results, results that matter to British Columbians.
Nope.
You're muted, Dan.
We lost you, Dan.
He was muted.
Yeah, see, it's out of practice. You've been gracious with your time. Renee, I know you've got some others. Do you have a couple more minutes? You can just a couple
Yeah.
more questions. So I do want to thank obviously the BC Chamber, Alex, and the team providing some information. Being outside the Lower Mainland, getting to lock up for us is always a challenge and expensive. So we rely on our partners. That includes some of the scanning. The UBCM is great. The BC Economic Development Association, great. And our partners at MMP provide a quick response for us, and we'll share that with our members. They did some budget analysis. One of the things, and I'm not sure, budgets are always good because we can just touch the surface here, but conscious there are some things that are buried that sometimes the government doesn't talk about. Spec tax was a good example of that. We found out a couple of weeks after, well, wait a minute, what is this? But one of the things that we saw that MMP had flagged was elimination of the remote tax credit for animation in the film. And I'm not sure if you've seen that or heard of that. But we have certainly in the Kelowna area, in the central Okanagan, animation and film, and those tax credits are so critical to ensuring that we see the development of the tech sector and animation. There's still provincial credits, but not the regional ones that move some of that outside of Vancouver. And it's just one of those ones I flagged. I'm not sure, Renee, if you've seen that, if that will have a potential impact of the animation that's going into the film sector or not, or if you've heard anything on that.
I have not, but I am very familiar with the tax credit. I do know that it has definitely stimulated our animation sector, such as Yeti or Bardell, and I know that that will have an impact, a dramatic impact, because it's one of the only offsets that we have to actually compete with larger studios that are in the Lower Mainland. Again, it would just show that the NDP knows where its votes come from, and is setting up to do just that. Yeah, and it would be disappointing. So definitely, I will dig into that one and ask a question.
Yeah, if you could, that'd be great. The other piece, comment, and again, this kind of, I had mentioned this. And by the way, if folks that are joining us, if you have a question for Renee, our MLA, or for Alex, please use the Q&A or chat function before we wrap up in about 10 minutes or so. The Emergency Measures Act, or the Emergency Act, there's been some legislative changes. And what I've heard from some local government officials, particularly in the regional district, is there's more requirements and burdens put on local government, but no ability for them to actually have the financial resources to respond to those needs, particularly regional districts, that the only way they provide services is through a service agreement that has to be approved by those that will pay the bill. So on the recovery side, there's much more emphasis in the new bill, and I didn't see anything in the budget with respect to economic recovery. And that's one of the things that we flagged since the fires in the central Okanagan, a coordinated effort to help in recovery. I think the best case study would be Lytton. And here we are, and as mentioned, there's money in the budget to help prevention, and those are all good things. But here's a community that got wiped off the face of the map and still has one building permit. And surely as a province, we could be responding better. Any thoughts? And is that an area that could be a little bit of work on that post-economic recovery when we have such significant impact? Shuswap's going to be in the same way, right? So thoughts, Renee?
Oh, sorry.
Have you seen anything?
Yeah, no, and we were very critical of how the new legislation read. We were hearing from our regional districts, and we were engaged in dialogue, and basically said this is a nothing sandwich. You aren't creating a real plan or roadmap to that economic recovery. It's also anemic when it comes to the disasters that are not as easily seen, like we are experiencing right now with our farming community within our tree fruit industry and wine growers, or vine growers, I should say, grape growers. They've been decimated over the last 4 years, largely due to climate emergencies. But there is no real plan to help in those particular situations. So you're right there. Right now it's still a reliance on the provincial government to have emergency funds ready, and it's on a case by case basis rather than actually having something that is a roadmap for regional districts to follow and be able to know that they can staff up, tool up on an ongoing basis so that they're ready to go and not running out like our regional district was to Best Buy to buy computers when a fire hits and they're trying to set up an emergency center. So I do think that there's way more that could be done and needs to be done in order to really create that community resilience that we desperately need.
And I might give a little heads up to Alex, at least. We are working on a policy. We are hosting the BC Chamber AHEM in May. And this is one of the many issues that we've flagged that, sure, greater coordination for prevention and mitigation. What about economic recovery? And the government is in the best place from a legal perspective and funding perspective provincially to assist. You can put a lot on the local government, but they don't have the financial wherewithal or capacity. And then you have private land ownership. So lots of issues at play, and we're going to work on that. Alex, was there anything you saw on the capital or operational side that would, Lytton and the residents would go, yeah, there's going to be accelerated assistance for us, or even in the interior for some of those communities hit by wildfires?
Well, in the case of Lytton, the village of Lytton was mentioned once in the budget document, and it was just a reference to the the very consequential fire that happened there. There was I did not find any additional dollars for help recovery of Lytton. In terms of the capital programs across, I mean, there are lots of capital programs underway in many different areas. The list is quite long, as it always is. I think what caught my eye with capital programs, though, is the cost overruns that they're seeing, which is driving up the costs for all of us, and we're seeing that in the debt figures. That's part of what's driving that is the cost overruns that we're seeing. So we could spend 15 minutes just going through all the projects. They're all listed in the budget if anybody really wants to go and search out ones, but they're spread across the province.
Yeah. Renee, as we wrap it up, a thought with respect to that, because if there's a capital amount allocation and you've got cost overruns, you either eat up your contingency or just do less. And what's interesting is, was there something unexpected that the government, I mean, we've been facing numerous challenges, but why the cost overruns? Any sense from your perspective? There are some pretty significant cost overruns on capital projects. I think even a doubling on one hospital in the Lower Mainland, even before they get shovels in the ground.
Yeah, and that's the case on the island as well. One of the hospitals is almost doubled in cost. It's sloppy. It's construction that's being done on a design build rather than design bid build. It's and it doesn't matter if it's a school, if it's a hospital, if it's a highway. And in some cases they are doing less. If you look at Highway 1 or what was or the highway extension out by the Shuswap, yes, they are taking kilometers off of those extensions and off of those upgrades and literally doing less. They are also doing less with the hospitals. You look at the first announcement for Surrey, the new Surrey Hospital, and look at this last one, they're doing less, but the project has over doubled in its cost, and $2.88 billion is right now where it's sitting. That is not what's happening just in the construction industry. You're not seeing the overall doubling of cost, but what we see from government is they've got their community benefits program, which adds between 30 and 40% to each project, and that's off the cuff, but that should be anticipated. But it's also sloppy budgeting because it's an unlimited credit card that they're using to fuel our province. So the scary part is that the four mega projects that are underway right now are coming to a close. So right now we've got 3,600 workers out at Site C. That number is going to be 40 in the next year. Nowhere is that mentioned what is going to happen with those four projects coming to a close and what's going to happen with all those workers coming back home. So, I mean, you got 10,000, 12,000 overall workers that will shrink down to a mere 100. So it's a little bit of a scary time here for BC and for our economy, and we're going to be an outlier simply because this province hasn't planned and hasn't done anything in this budget that would say otherwise in terms of actually stimulating our economy, seeing our private sector surge back after being really hard hit by a death of 1,000 cuts.
Renee, you've been very gracious with your time. I know you have lots of demands on your schedule, an early start, and you were in Victoria. So any final quick thoughts on the budget or expectations that taxpayers in the Okanagan might expect, or going forward? We do have an election coming up, so.
We do. Vote well, vote often. No. I was going to say, the two things that I said in my response to the throne speech just this last week in Victoria was, number one, the emperor has no clothes. When it feels bad, when it's hard, when things aren't working, when you're having to make cuts in your own budget, when you're having to figure out where those pennies are going to come from, when you're seeing businesses cut staff, believe them. That the situation is dire, and it should be so, and we should be saying it is so. And I use the example of the emperor has no clothes. It's time for BC to say the emperor doesn't have any clothes on, rather than allowing the NDP this free ride on saying, no, it's all good, it's all good, it's all good. Look how much money we're spending. Who cares how much money you're spending if you're not getting the results that we need? And it's time for British Columbians to demand those results. And I'm hoping that that we'll stand up and do that. My second quote will be Maya Angelou, which is, when someone tells you who they are, shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And this government has had 2 terms, 7 years to fix things, and they haven't. We have the highest housing prices in North America, the worst rents, and it's not getting better. And they're not even predicting it's going to get better. They're predicting that housing prices are going to go up over the next 3 years. So I think that we need to believe who they say they are, who they've shown themselves to be, and that we actually need to really take a second look and vote in a different government in this next election.
Renee, thanks very much. You are an opposition member. You're the party whip, but you're among our local MLAs, and thanks very much. We know you have a very busy schedule. We look forward to talking to you again. Alex, I'll keep you on for a little bit. We want to just talk about some of the chamber wins. Thanks. So, Alex, I just want to go back to, just as we wrap up, and just for a couple minutes to share. So I did bring up, and we've mentioned some of these with respect to the EHT, the employer health tax. We get using acronyms and abbreviations. So the thresholds increased to 1. We did push, the BC Chamber did push to 1.5. We talked about the electricity affordability credit. So is the mining sector a benefactor of this 4.65% electricity consumption?
Yeah.
And is there, because that was one of the pundits in the Victoria talked about, it's not talked about a lot by the government, but potentially this is a help to the mining sector?
Sure. I mean, in the mining sector where they consume, or in the manufacturing, and whether it's the pulp sector, where they use large amounts of electricity, this will be a large cost. And I think 4.65%. Sure, we'd like that to be bigger, but that will result in a commensurate offset in their cost to how much power they use. Again, it is one time. It is just for 2024. I think if we could stay on mining for a second, I would say that mining did see some other improvements in the budget that I didn't catch at first. We didn't talk about earlier today, and that is around the carbon tax that the mines will be paying through a great deal of discussions and work with the industry. Government has been able to move on the carbon tax and get it more in line with where the federal government's carbon tax is going to go, so that it doesn't put BC mines at such a disadvantage to our competitors in other parts of the country, but also around the world. So that was in the budget this year, where the output-based pricing, what a mouthful, was adjusted to help with those with some of the mines.
Yeah, and we're interesting in the unique position here in the Okanagan where, we're a major center in the Canadian context.
For sure.
Not a global wise, but we hear quite often from the small rural communities, forestry issues, mining issues, and we're an export economy, and when it's an integrated economy, so how the mining sector does plays a role in how BC does. So it's good to hear that information from you. One of the other things that I wanted to come back to here, and I know the chambers, particularly in the Northwest, have been working very closely with some of the local governments on this Resource Benefits Alliance. Conceptually, just for those that are on and conscious of our time too, this is because some of the industrial development is outside municipal boundaries. And so a bit of concern raised by the local governments, and I guess there's 21, I didn't realize there was that many up there. They say, well, they're bearing the cost of that increased population, but have no tax base to pay for the services for that. So they got into a discussion around this Northwest Resource Benefits Alliance, and 250 million over 5 years is I'm assuming this is positive because it helps. Absolutely. Because of that industrial development. Is this what they were seeking? And I know the BC Chamber has been involved in helping that particular area of the province.
Yeah, this has been something that the local chambers in Northwest BC, along with the municipalities and the BC Chamber, has put our shoulder behind it to try and provide some extra funding for those communities, because they do face a greater burden from the activities happening outside their municipal boundaries, and so they're not able to benefit from them. It's modeled on a similar program up in the Northeast. So it's not exactly, I don't believe it's exactly the same, but so last year government announced that they were willing to get into this agreement, and they've provided some funding here over the next 5 years.
So a couple of other things I picked up as we wrapped up. The training tax credits have been extended, and some of these are flagged by our partners at MMP. The clean building tax credit deadline extended. This was the one around animation productions from the regional and distant location tax credits, that they'll come to an end effective June 1st. So we're trying to get a grasp on, okay, what will be the impact on that? So
I just quickly, while we were having that conversation, flipped through the budget document. The explanation, according to the Ministry of Finance, the reason for the animation production to be eliminated is that I guess they were finding that some of the people using, some of the firms using it were to offset remote workers who, maybe it was a Vancouver-based or a Lower Mainland-based company, but they were using it and accessing it to offset those workers who were working remotely, as opposed to coming in and setting up an office or a space in a region such as Kelowna. But I still think that may obviously negatively affect those who are working in Kelowna. So that's
we'll certainly
the
keep an eye on
explanation.
that. Yeah, great. Yeah. Appreciate that. Oil and gas exploration expenses are excluded from the mining exploration tax credit. So
yeah, those have been longstanding tax credits in the natural gas space to be able to go and explore and open up new natural gas fields. I'm not sure the rationale behind its elimination, but it's no oil and gas companies are no longer going to be eligible to use that tax credit.
All right. I think that covers most of it. Alex, is there any other takeaways? You spent, it's a lot of information to absorb. It's a big budget document. You spent some time in the lockup, talked to some other folks. Any final takeaways that you had?
Well, I think the big takeaway for the BC Chamber was, while we appreciate the change on the EHT, and a modest electricity credit, I think the long-term spending makes us a little uneasy in terms of how we're going to spend this. And I think goes back to some of your comments at the beginning, Dan, in terms of generating an economy that can actually drive forward tax revenue. And, over time, we're asking our children, as Renee pointed out, we're asking our children to pay for services that we're receiving today. I think the other piece that I caught after leaving the lockup is that even government's own figures looking at GDP per capita, prosperity per person divided by per person, and I know GDP per capita is not very sexy a term, but if you look at GDP as a measure of our overall prosperity per capita, it's actually going down over the course of the fiscal plan. I just pulled up the numbers here. Yeah, it's falling by about 2% over 24 and 25, which is concerning when we're spending a lot of money as a province. The debt numbers are it's a staggering number, but we do need to build service. We do need to build infrastructure. It's making sure we have the revenue and the economy that can support financing those expenditures, and that's, I think, where we're feeling a little bit apprehensive about this budget.
Alex, I'm going to ask one more because
Sure.
I had it down to ask and I forgot earlier.
You know me, I'll talk.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I say, if you want to know anything about an organization, look at its finances. It'll tell you its values, it's tell you its priorities. One of the things that struck me in this is the economic growth projections. And only it sticks in my mind after looking at this because it was the same case last year when I went. They've been pretty conservative last year in their economic growth projections, below the Forecast Council. But it's the other way around this time, and with this fiscal plan, that their actual Ministry of Finance is growth projections, although marginally, but they are ahead of the Forecast Council. So two things. We do have some folks still with us. Quick explanation of what the Forecast Council is. And a philosophical change, it looks like, of the Ministry of Finance approach to forecasting growth.
Sure. So the Forecast Council is made up of 13 economists from across. I'm not sure if they're all based in BC or not, but they come from the major banks, financial institutions, notable economists. And they all provide to the Ministry of Finance their projections for economic growth or decline in the years ahead. They advise the ministry on the different factors that support their forecasts. From that, the Ministry of Finance then needs to select their own economic forecast for modeling purposes to set the budget, to figure out how much money, how much revenue is likely to come into government. As you noted, Dan, traditionally, the Ministry of Finance has taken the average of the Forecast Council, the 13 folks, and then gone below it and been conservative. That way, if the economy grows more, they have more resources to spend. If it doesn't grow as much, they're protected because they haven't anticipated that it'll grow. So this year marks actually the second time that government has gone above the average for what the Forecast Council is projecting, and they've gone. I don't have the number right in front of me. I know it was in the briefing note in that on the presentation you had there. A little bit above this year, and I think the next couple years, quite a bit above.
Yeah, the Forecast Council was 0.9 for 2023. They're at 1. 2024 is 0.5. The ministry's at 0.8. 2025 2025 was 2.1 and 2.3 respectively, Ministry of Finance, so slightly above the forecast council.
Yeah, and the ministry's rationale is that they are still within the average. They're still within the range of what the forecast council. There's a chart in the budget. I just pulled it up. That the forecast council, their low is actually a negative growth this year. A 0.2% negative growth to 1% growth, and they've picked 0.8. In 2025, the highest projection is 3.6, the lowest is 0.5, and they've gone with 2.3. So that's their rationale, but it is a departure from what they have traditionally done over the last couple decades, I'm gonna kind of guess.
Yeah. We've covered most of it. We've tried to maintain a focus on the business and potentially on the region and interior and Kelowna and how this might impact our local economy and then the provincial side as well. One thing we did mention, they do have, and I'm going to mention it, and I'll tell you why. They have a $400 renter's tax credit that is applicable this time around. And that's good news for my daughter who's a renter. And I will go out of my way to tell her, by the way, when I do your taxes this year, you're going to get a small little credit of $400 that comes off, make her going to education a little bit easier. But Alex, thanks for your time this morning and all the
You're most
work
welcome.
on analyzing the budget and the work you do and leading the policy work at the BC Chamber.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Dan.
And Alex, we look forward to seeing you when you come to Prince George or to Kelowna for the BC Chamber AGM. Yeah, we're not going back to Prince George. We've been there too many times over the last few years.
I am looking forward to coming and seeing you in Kelowna and enjoying many of the services and have a little bit of fun is what I guess I'm trying.
We got a few surprises for you. We'll make sure you enjoy it, but we're going to do a lot of work around the policy side. So Alex McMillan, the current director for policy at the BC Chamber, has joined us this morning. I want to thank Renee Merrifield as well for joining us, and those that have joined us online. As a little treat, we'll send you some of the briefing documents we got from our other partners, including MMP, the UBCM, BC Economic Development Association, so you can read a little bit more along the way. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day and a fantastic weekend.